So as Sarah makes her way to the stage, first of all, I bring you apologies from Craig Morgans, who is listed on the program today, but Craig had a bit of a mishap last week, an accident, and was sort of waved off traveling until he's had a chance to heal up a bit. So we wish him best of luck. But we were fortunate that we have two great folks, one of whom I didn't know was about to win an award. So there we go. You just won for Employer Brand from Gulf Bank of Kuwait, Sarah Hashim Al-Rafai, and Jason Munoz, who's Sarah is the Senior Manager for HR Development at the Gulf Bank of Kuwait. Jason is the head of Global TA at Weatherford. So we've got quite a mix of different cultural perspectives, which Andrew's coming in from the United Kingdom. Jason's Canadian, which is like being American but nice.
Sorry.
See, they're already apologizing. That's just the way Canadians are. Sarah's coming in from the Middle Eastern perspective. And what's good about this is, from a panel perspective, you only get one employer brand really globally. So how does everyone say it, if you think about it? All right? And you only get one crack to be authentic. If your employee, or I shouldn't say employee, if your candidate says, wow, their messaging said one thing, but my process feels very different, and you're not authentic, that's a problem. The same thing, if you work for a company and they've got all this web presence and advertising out there that says we're fun and it's an absolutely dreadful place to work, how do your employees feel about your company? Well, they feel like you're a bunch of liars. So employment branding is, it's fragile, is the right word. All right. 20 years ago, no one was really talking about employment branding. I was in the recruitment industry. Some of you in the audience, I was the chief operating officer and the president of a company called Connexa, and we had a thriving, branding practice. We bundled it in with a bunch of other things. And at that time, HR was almost indifferent in many circumstances to the brand. But as the recruiting teams, we knew that we had to be. Okay, and the hardest part was, we had very little control. So the world we're in today, 20 years later, all right, you have a lot more levers at your disposal coming from human resources, but that doesn't mean it's easy, and you all are living with that. So we've got, Andrew Wilkinson, who's the executive leader of People Scout and has almost 600 years of employment branding experience looking at now. Andrew's been doing this for 2 or 3 decades, advising companies. Jason's is the head of TA for a very large firm, and Sarah just, she's got the plaque to prove it, right? So all their companies have a very good experience and expertise in branding. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. And that is, sadly, that you will have to deal with the hiring managers, okay, and some of the folks that maybe don't get it quite as much. So I promised that we'd be a little politically incorrect. So the first question, now I'm going to go to the panelists on this, and is the title of this session is Perceptions Happen. But usually when you see blank happens, we're talking about something else, aren't we? That phrase. So because it's an HR conference, I really can't use that word that starts with S. But let's talk about I'll use the word S, stuff that really happens. So let me start with Andrew. During your career advising, hundreds of companies, I'm sure, during your career, what is the single dumbest suggestion you've ever had to talk a client, clients made to you that you've had to talk them out of? Where they came to you and you went like, that's absolutely bollocks, these people are insane, but you couldn't say it out loud.
That's a great question. I kind of go back, and I think 600, Elliot, is a little excessive. But
I heard you branded
probably
the Black
approaching
Death
40
was yours.
years.
I thought Black Death was yours.
Approaching 40 years, but I was thinking about this, and I can go back. In my younger days, I worked with Ford Motor Company as a customer. And at the time, Ford were kind of in their heyday. They had the best 3 selling cars in the UK, kind of were investing heavily in their engineering centres. And they had this image of being kind of very old, stuffy company. And they were trying to attract you can't say the word younger talent, but in those days you could say younger talent, more energized talent. They were trying to bring people in that were going to kind of move the dial in terms of their engineering works. And we'd been doing a lot of work, almost pre-employer brand. It was more just about great creativity that told a story. And we'd been doing some great work. We kind of did this advert for technical people called Bright Sparks, and we'd taken a spark plug and kind of zazzed it all up. And we were kind of trying to do different things that made them just come across as a different organization. We'd done this beautiful ad with 3 pictures of 3 cars, and the quote underneath was any color you like as long as it's green, which obviously goes back to the kind of 1920s quote from Henry Ford when it was any color you like as long as it's black, and this was all about environmental engineering. So, we've been in all this fantastic work, taking them on a journey and kind of trying to present them as this kind of innovative and more dynamic company. And I got called into a meeting. And they said, right, we've got this huge campaign. We need to recruit hundreds and hundreds of engineers. And we want to do a great ad. So I'm thinking, we've just done these beautiful bits of work, lovely, award-winning and whatever. And the client said, yeah, what we want to do is we want to take, and this is back in the days of press advertising, obviously. We want to do a double-page spread in the Daily Telegraph. So this is a broadsheet newspaper, and it was 2 whole pages. And my creative juices are going mad. I'm thinking partly dollars, partly excitement, creativity, and what could we do with a double-page spread? And the client goes, yeah, on the left-hand side, I want a map of the UK, and I want all the hotels that we're going to go and do open days on the map. And I'm sitting there thinking, Bright Sparks, any colour you like, as long as and then, so although I wanted to talk him out of this, it was £108,000, which back in 1990 was a lot of money for one ad. So actually, I didn't talk him out of it. I just went, okay, we'll do a shit ad. Sorry, that's the word we're not allowed to use, isn't it? Yeah. So we'll just do one really, really large, very expensive, actually quite shitty ad. But it didn't kind of quite go in the vein of all the other beautiful creative work that we've been doing. So not quite talked him out of it, but, did my best for a while.
So, I joked around that I wanted the panel to be the, sort of like the HR version of the Graham Norton show. We have our first profanity out. So I feel more comfortable with that representation to you and being authentic. And by the way, Bill McRae from my team is always saying to me that I'm one joke away from ending my career. So you really want to be in the room for this. This might be the day. All right, Jason, I'm sure you've had that with hiring managers. There's no loss of, the thing about marketing that's different is, and when at Connection, when I went up with marketing reporting to me, one of the things that I was told by our head of marketing at the time is the problem with marketing versus HR versus accounting and general counsel and some of the things is everyone has an opinion on it. So I'm sure your hiring managers are full of feedback for what you should be doing better. So what's the dumbest single suggestion you've had to combat at Weatherford or one of your prior appointments?
So prior appointment, wanted to be cutting edge, and we wanted to resonate with those quickly, get them to apply to job quickly, wanted to be local, wanted to be in the market. So everybody has a cell phone, correct? Everyone have a phone? Pick it up. Text job to 90210. Let's do it. Pick it up. Let's see how quick you can do it. Okay, stop. How many people saw how many fingers I was holding up? Just shout it out. Those that were texting at the time, how many fingers did I have up? 2. Right, so the group that we were trying to resonate with on this were drivers. So it was a great idea. We came up with texting to apply. We wanted to make it quick, come in, engage, things like this. And it was truly cutting edge at the time. But our managers that were in the field wanted us to put this on the back of every single truck that we had. In a very large sign that said, we want you, we need you, text to apply to this number, and had the company name and everything on it. And not only was it illegal in one of the countries where we were, but as you can see, where were your eyes? And we have them driving tractor trailers, very large vehicles, liability all over this. And they said, but you don't understand. We need to capture them where they are. I said, oh, I do understand.
So just remember, employment brands can kill, okay?
Yes.
That's great. All right, Sarah, how about what's the dumbest single thing your HR group has been confronted with that some hiring manager thought was a brilliant branding idea?
Well, speaking of counterintuitive suggestions, we do get those from some of the hiring managers. Not an idea per se, but just a suggestion. When the strategy of hiring or the strategy of the bank was to optimize and to grow from within, the trend that some hiring managers were taking were, I need this vacancy filled and I want an external hire. And at that time, the communication internally was, we want organic growth. And this hiring manager says, yeah. Well, okay, but I still need someone from outside. And we said, organic growth means growing from within, grooming from within. So I can just go and poach someone from another department. Well, no, the skill sets required need to actually match. So it's just the suggestions that we get that don't necessarily fall in line with the strategy that we're trying to implement in HR, and the understanding or the clarity that business have on that. That's where sometimes we see these discrepancies take place. It's not that they don't understand, it's they want their demands met immediately, and whatever way that we need to do that, then we are always available to provide the service, but at the same time, you also need to understand that this is one entity and we all grow together. So again, the suggestion that you had just provided was very similar to how things can be sometimes counterintuitive to what an organization is really trying to do in terms of branding and sending out the message out there. So,
and thank you. And just out of curiosity in the audience, I mean, how many of you, when I read the question out loud, immediately and I'm going to ask you to raise your hands, thought of some really dumb suggestion you had to fight back during your career from a hiring manager? Just show of hands. How many of you sat there and I think the British slang phrase is that you were gobsmacked by the suggestion and you didn't want to just blurt out, what are you, are you daft or whatever it may be that you would say in your language? But how many of you have been confronted with something you thought was just absolutely dumb as could be and you had to just sit there and bite your tongue? All right, raise your hands. Don't be bashful. All right. But that came from me, Debbie. Put your hand down. Put your hand down. That was my suggestion. Now, all right, so a number of you raised your hands. Yeah, so we all had that. But, we just did a study at HR Today, and we found that one of the problems is the consumer brand, and maybe Ford's a good example where, you talked about the consumer brand is very powerful, right? And the employment brand has to sort of coordinate with it, because you can't have a consumer brand that says we're steady, we're stable, and we're your grandfather's Oldsmobile or whatever it may be, and then try to do this, we're hip and we're innovative and whatever. So the consumer brand and the employment brand have to actually sort of walk a little bit hand in hand. But there's little coordination. I think in the HR Today study we found it's less than 1 out of 5 companies there's any coordination at all. So what are the best ways for the talent acquisition function to actually coordinate with corporate communications and marketing to make sure that the employment brand is fitting an overall strategy and that you can get employment brand cooperation from marketing? I know you've all done. Let me start with Sarah. Since we came to you last, we'll start with you and we'll go back down to the panel.
Sure. So In our branding internally, it has to be aligned definitely with our EVP, and that alike with our external communication and our promise to our customers. So internally to our employees, we do promise to deliver the experience, being an employee within Gulf Bank, of providing engagement, providing the support, providing growth and development within the organization, and also being extremely mindful of our customer base, so providing customer service excellence. And we have a lot of gamified approaches towards making that experience fun and engaging for our employees internally. But in return, and in order for them to do that, it's extremely important that we maintain our promise to our external customers. So dealing with our internal comms, along with our alignment with our marketing department and what goes out to the public and the promise that we deliver to our consumer base, is all tied into the experience of our corporate, our retail, our operational excellence. So all these really are interlinked and tied in together, because what you fundamentally instill and the values and the priorities internally within your employees will ultimately reflect on what it is that you want to deliver externally. So having that connection is really where we focus on. And we don't want it to be seen as separate. We actually like to link them together such that one is actually resulting in the delivery of the other. And customer service excellence is really at the core of our promise to our internal customers, our employees, as well as our potential and current customers at Gulf Bank.
Jason, how about from your perspective, what's the best ways to collaborate with corporate marketing to make sure that the employment brand is both synchronizing and then also resonating with the candidate audience you're trying to attract?
Well, the two kind of drive each other. Well, one truly drives the other first. And there's often that perception, usually within operations, that where you have a product that, okay, well, we've put it out there. We're already branding who we are and what it is. And it's no, you're branding the product, but we need the individuals to be attracted in to produce the product, to drive it, whether if it's a service or an actual good, bits and bytes that you're selling. And in order to do that, we have to showcase the individuals that are doing this to come in and want to be a part of that, to produce that and bring that intellectual capital in to do that. And a prime example at Weatherford right now is we do an absolutely fabulous job of telling everybody awards and the type of products that we have and going out. But we were doing a horrible job at showcasing the great minds that were sitting in behind that and the fun that people have doing this. And, when you go in to mention this, like, we spend thousands of dollars on marketing. I'm like, I agree, but who are we marketing to? And they go, our clients, right? Well, we have more than one client, right? And candidates are that integral piece of that candidate coming in, both internally and externally, to grow that career and going out. So in speaking with both marketing, our corporate communications, but more importantly, operations, as to how do we drive that brand and bringing it through, it's putting through that value proposition, like you were saying, not just the EVP of why am I here and what I'm doing, but how does that turn into ROI on the bottom line of producing more, of attracting people in faster, right? And by doing that, then that generates more revenue. So it's really trying to drive it as a business inside of TA, HR, sales, operations, and everywhere else, and not just as an added function behind. You have to show the numbers as to drive the results.
Andrew, as someone who's been in sort of the advisory role, if you will, I mean, and you mentioned an example that's actually a great example in iconic brand in Ford in the first question. You want your candidates to also be Ford drivers, right? You want them to be car buyers in the brand. So the candidates and the consumer are often the same person. So how have you been able to work with, either consumer brands, and I know you've worked with some that are not consumer brands, to really make sure that those two groups are meshing and talking to each other?
Yeah, I think I think you're right, Elliot. In terms of being on the advisory side of it, then we're often behind the scenes of that initial work. And what we would always suggest an organisation does is put together a working party to help develop their EVP, because if you can get senior stakeholders involved from the HR function alongside senior stakeholders from corporate comms or marketing, then from the beginning, they understand what the project is trying to deliver. And a really good EVP, employer brand project, should always start, what's the outcome, what we're trying to do? And if you've got that outcome agreed and aligned between those key stakeholders, then it tends to kind of make the project more successful. I've seen both examples. I've seen talent go off into a corner, develop an EVP, do all the work, and then kind of come out and go da-da, and then marketing go, no, you're not going to do that. That's, you know, completely against what we want to do. And it's been a bit of a disaster. And I've seen the key stakeholders all get in a room, all aligned behind a common outcome, and then really kind of work, you know, in tandem together to create something that's very powerful. And I think, you know, when you're working for a B2B company, it's a little easier, because you know, really what you've got to do in this whole project is think of the audience you're trying to reach. And when the audience for corporate comms and marketing is a business, it's kind of slightly easier because they see the difference, and therefore that allows you to go and do an EVP, which is engaging talent, and they kind of don't feel that there's an overlap and a conflict. When you're working for a consumer business, and as you say, consumers and job seekers are one and the same, then you start to get into this area around, you know, kind of them wanting to be overly involved, and consumer marketing getting confused around how one message for talent might bring them into the business, but that isn't the same message that will get them to buy the products and services. And actually, if you kind of segment it correctly, you can get this to work really well. And one of our clients at the moment we're working for is Diageo. And obviously Diageo have got some amazing consumer brands. But if you go back and if you do the research and you really understand what it is that attracts, motivates talent to join and stay with an organization, and then put that message together appropriately, and then talk about the channels that you're going to use to reach the talent, then consumer marketing people actually start to understand really what you're doing. And I wouldn't say get out of the way, but they work with you because they can see that it's much more strategic. And I think that's where EVPs had to kind of develop in terms of being more strategic, more aligned to the principles of general marketing, because then they actually see the logic and see what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and you know, I think from you know, our perspective as someone who's watching the market and seeing what a lot of organizations do, one of the great things about where this panel is we just saw some great examples of consumer market, of employment branding and marketing pieces. And Sarah was even in the video, and she is available for other videos if you want to get in touch with her agent. But the reality is that there's a difference between consumer branding and employment branding. And this is something that I think HR needs to do a better job of explaining to corporate branding, to the corporate branding side of it. And the corporate brand has to generate partly an emotional reaction, particularly on the consumer side. And Debbie did a good job explaining that this morning. Employment branding has to tell a story, right? And in many ways, it's actually more complex. And I think sometimes the corporate marketing people they understand it, but particularly if you're working for iconic, very established brands, they don't necessarily understand the complexity of telling that story in such a competitive environment for candidates, that it has to tell a story while getting the emotional reaction. So you saw, you know, some very good examples of that with Marriott, you know, very high energy, you know, about, you know, how exciting it is to be there, and it had all the different pictures of travel and the emotional responses. Same thing with Gulf Bank and Kuwait, it's about belonging, growing, et cetera. So, you know, these are the scenarios where you've got to be able to really make the brand resonate. But that was all positive. So let's now talk about like some of the really challenging things we've got to deal with. So social media, okay? Social media has given a voice to the individual in the modern world in a way we've never seen before in human history. But it's also become the megaphone of crackpots, okay? You know, it's become the voice of the lunatic fringe, all right? And all you have to do is like spend about 20 minutes on Twitter, and you'll start to see exactly what I mean. So how can you manage your social media feeds to drown out, negate, or offset the weird, the loud, the disaffected, okay? Jason, let's start with you. you know, people are attacking the message of Weatherford, or they may be crackpot former employees, you know, that kind of thing. What can you do as an employer branding team to make sure that you're somehow drowning out or negating that social media damage that will sometimes fly at brands? And by the way, we have another question coming on, wait for it, Glassdoor. We'll get to that. All right, go ahead, Jason.
Not ignore it. So I think there's this perception that you just ignore it, right? And you can't. You need to address it, but you need to do it in a way that doesn't entice more of the argument, right? Reality is that everybody has a say, and the majority of the comments that come through, unfortunately, usually by those that have either been dismissed or just not happy with what's going on. It's the same thing when you look at everything. A lot of people don't talk about what's good, right? But we can always talk about something that just doesn't feel right. But we need to be engaged. We hear this over and over when we talk about it as an HR group or as a TA group, and then we need to engage. Well, you need to engage in your mediums that are there if there's an outlet. And one way to combat this is not to be dormant. It doesn't matter what the medium is, if it's a Facebook, a Glassdoor, a Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is. If somebody's talking about you and they're talking about you regularly, then be involved in the conversation. And there are mechanisms out there that can actually help automate this for you. So one of the ways that we did this is we actually put out feeds, and whether if that's how we're involved in the community, different career events, just even new photos about what had happened, or even just our brand or putting out new opportunities, we would put this out on a regular feed that would go out on a regular basis every day, and then we'd slow it down the weekend so it wasn't bombarded on the weekends. But we would then also address the concerns that were truly out there from the crackpots, right? Because some of them were valid, and we wanted them to know that they were being heard and not ignored. And it helps us also improve as an organization. So don't ignore it. Engage in it. And the ones that are truly, how can I say it? The ones that are truly attacking your brand, there are mechanisms to remove those as well.
How many people in here have a Twitter handle? Raise your hand if you have a Twitter handle. All right, so statistically speaking, about 1 out of 50 people on Twitter is a crackpot. With the crackpot, there's at least one in the room. Raise your hand. No, all right. So Sarah, what do you do at Gulf Bank of Kuwait? I mean, I'm sure you have people tweeting at the bank's handle or, you know, commenting on various platforms. What do you think of what Jason said? How do you guys handle it?
I definitely echo what Jason was saying about not ignoring it and addressing it. What we tend to do through our social media forums is we like to put out there our initiatives, our milestones. We like to celebrate with our customers our achievements and hope that those positives can overpower any negative media taking place. But it's also important to acknowledge that you can't just ignore it. As Jason rightly said, some of them are valid, and we do make it a point through every social media outlet available to address each and every comment that comes through, as massive as they may be. We take in the positive, but we also address the negative. So we reach out to those handles separately, and we try to not investigate, but we like to inquire, understand what is it that we can do to provide a better service. If the complaint is about a certain service, if it's about their waiting time, their queue time, something has been delayed. But we also take the time to thank those who have actually used or taken the time out of their day to post something positive about an experience they've gone through. So no one goes unaddressed through our social media outlets. And usually putting out there what it is that you do and celebrating the achievements with the customers and the employees tends to give that positive outlook on social media. But yeah, you definitely can't ignore those who just want to do it for the sake of doing it. You address them, you do the most that you can do, but then other than that, it's limited as to any measures that can be taken.
Andrew, what's your perspective on this, advising?
I tend to agree with Jason and Sarah. I think I think I'm going to just twist the question around, Elliot, a little bit, because I think there's an interesting challenge. We can talk about the crackpots, and yeah, there are some. But I kind of just tell a little story. I went to Bruges a couple of years ago, and as part of my wedding anniversary, and we chose the best restaurant on TripAdvisor in Bruges. And went along and had an amazing meal. It was really, really top class. And I said to the restaurant owner, I said, you know, we're here because of your TripAdvisor review. And he said, I'm glad to hear that. He said, because I need to tell you why we're number one. And he said, about 18 months ago, I saw I didn't really care much about TripAdvisor, didn't think much of it. And then I read this review, and somebody come into the restaurant and they had genuinely had a bad experience because I read their review. I remember them coming in and I kind of just thought that wasn't our best service. And they wrote this thing and I was appalled. And he said it kind of was like a light going on, that I realized now that I was in the shop window and anyone could comment any day about what they had as an experience in my restaurant. And therefore, I made the intention from that day onwards that no one would get a bad experience, that everyone would come along, and that we would raise the bar of everything we did, from service to food, and that I would, in a sense, enjoy the benefit of that because people would go away and write great reviews. And he said, that's how we've got to be number one. And it was something like 2,500 reviews. So this wasn't an insignificant number. And I think that the reason I say that little story is I think it's a challenge to everyone in talent acquisition, that there are people out there who can write about their experience as a candidate, and they can put it in whatever social media channel, Glassdoor, whatever. And the question is the service, is the experience they're getting actually good enough? And are we as talent acquisition professionals conscious of that potential feedback? And just like that restaurant owner, aiming to have great reviews written about the experience that our candidates have as they go through the process with us. Because I think that's just it's kind of almost a wake-up call, which says it isn't just about dealing with the crackpots, and there are some, and yeah, I agree you have to kind of put comments in there, but it's more actually how conscious are we of that transparency, the opportunity for them to give feedback, and therefore in our daily activities really pushing ourselves to give a great candidate experience so that the reviews are actually positive and encouraging other talent to apply.
It's a great point. So let's go and talk about Glassdoor then, all right, while we're here. Now, I want to tell you that there was an article written actually by Matt Charney, who's part of Allegis, but he had not joined Allegis at the time, where he's talking about one of the early investor presentations for what was then about a year-old company, Glassdoor, and one of the panelists asking them, it's a great idea about getting online feedback, but how are you going to make money? Okay, that panelist was me in that investor presentation. I said, great, but how are you going to make money? Well, and I've been openly critical of them. I said, now we've learned it's an extortion scheme. And I've actually written that, right? Because the ability to curate the sites has really sort of put corporate HR in an uncomfortable position. Do you pay so you can go on your site and, edit, et cetera, or sort of blunt the force? So the camera's to your back, no one can see you. So I'm going to ask the audience, how many of you think Glassdoor is a blessing? And how many of you think it's a curse? So the blessing first, raise your hands. How many of you think it's a curse? Okay, interesting. It's a few people raised their hands. The rest of you are cowards, all right? But some people like it and some people don't. And that's one of the things. And I will tell you one thing, though. If you ask a 22-year-old university graduate where they're researching companies, they're going to say Glassdoor is one of the top 2 or 3 sources of information they're gathering. And that's where it's a blessing. So is it a blessing or a curse? Let me ask our panelists, what's the best way to manage attraction, particularly by that young demographic, with Glassdoor? How do you sort of navigate making sure that source is consistent with your employer brand? And one of the problems that TA has, and we all know this, is the candidate experience was not the focal point of a lot of the software that exists. So we really have to build around candidate experience because our systems are somewhat flawed in that respect. All the applicant tracking solutions out there were originally built as electronic file cabinets. We still haven't emerged from that era yet. So Andrew, let me start with you, okay? Glassdoor, how do you make sure that your message on Glassdoor is the message you want to have and control?
Yeah, I'm going to sort of sidestep the earlier point. I think it is a challenge. Client organizations are frustrated with their, let's say, their business model, but it's there, exists, people use it, and the job seekers and the talent out there that use it doesn't necessarily understand the frustration that organizations may have. So either they see it perhaps as neutral as many people would say TripAdvisor is. So, it's got the same perception in the consumer world as TripAdvisor, and therefore that they use it. I think, we as an organization, as PeopleScout, will just focus on how do we deal with the comments that come into us. We have a kind of process of identifying the people that maybe put comments up. Typically the HR function will respond to some of those. If we feel that there's a particular point that needs to be taken more seriously, then I'll go in there, I'll write a response and kind of actually address those concerns. I think you have to give your view. You can't just let the views go randomly out there. What we also do, though, is manage to the best we can the comments that are up there. So when people have done their year anniversary, when people have finished their probation, we will actually communicate to the business and encourage people to go and put their views. We won't tell them what to write, but what we want is perhaps more of the existing employees who hopefully have got a more positive story to tell to populate Glassdoor with the right messaging. That way, the odd negative one that comes along is often drowned out by a kind of wider number of positive bits of feedback. So I think you have to take responsibility for it. It's a channel which is being used by talent to review your organization. And what you need to do is, in a way, push the best, most positive bits of information in there and then occasionally deal with those negative ones when they come along.
How about you, Jason?
I agree. It's like anything else. It's a tool. Right? And it's only effective if you utilize the tool. If you choose not to use it, well, you'll get what you get. And for us, currently where I'm at and everywhere I've been, it's you have to resonate with those that are coming to that and attracting. So the content that you put up there needs to be current. You need to constantly be looking at that and updating it, reviewing what's there. But the one nice thing about it that I like as being in TA is that they will scrape all my jobs for free, and I'm cheap. So, I love it, right? But in doing so, I want to make sure that the content that we put in is there, it's current, it's speaking to those that are coming in. And when I review the comments that are coming in, I also share those when I see something that's truly relevant with a hiring manager, right? With the rest of my community and I will investigate that and see what's going on if we start seeing a trend, right? We do this internally. We put out these hiring manager surveys, we put out candidate surveys when they come in. Well, people are doing this at large based on the perception of the company, right? And we may know what's reality internally, but this is the perception of us. So if we do not deal with this head on and we do not create that environment of perception for those to view us, how are we going to attract them coming in? We have to create that culture externally because people will not experience it until they're actually with you. So we have to create it. So if you leave it be, you'll get what it is. But if you engage in it actively, you can help create that book to turn the chapter and read the story. So it's, personally, I don't mind it. It's good.
All right, Sarah?
Like many things, can be a double-edged sword, but from my perspective, I see it as a blessing. Though Glassdoor may not be extremely prominent in the region, in the GCC at least, we do keep an eye out to see what reviews are posted there. It's interesting to see the feedback, it's interesting to see the interaction from the community about our organization as well as our peers, our competitors, and others in the country altogether. And sometimes a talent war isn't always bad because it really gets organizations to up their game. And if you really do invest in your employees, the return in their service and the effect on the bottom line, then sometimes having a competition isn't so bad. And Glassdoor is a forum where these can be captured. So yes, it can be a wake-up call. As Jason said, it's a tool. and the way you choose to utilize that tool can play in your favor or can really cause some damage. You're the one that decides how you want to, but we do definitely keep an eye out for Glassdoor.
You know, years ago, I remember going on there was a website for how many people have worked in the pharmaceutical or life sciences industry with clients or whatever? Yeah, so there was a website called Cafe Pharma. It was very popular in the United States. And my team brought in a thing called Cafe Pharma. And it started, Elliot Clark is, and then there were all these adjectives. And they were pretty negative, but only one of them was untrue. So, you know, so I was gruff, I was irreverent, I could be profane, I could be a real driver, et cetera, et cetera. It said I was very unfair, which the people around me would not say that, but they would tell you that I'm a driver, that I can be gruff at times, et cetera. So sometimes when you look at the Glassdoor stuff, before you get defensive, you have to actually ask yourself, maybe the mirror I'm looking at is saying I'm the fairest of them all, but I'm not. And I think it is a mixed blessing, because it tells you what people are really thinking, and then sometimes you got to deal with it. So good points, everyone. And one of the things to deal with, and I mentioned that youthful demographic, we now are in a situation where we have 4 generations in the workforce. I mean, literally, and the generational cohorts are kind of arbitrary, truthfully, and the distinctions between millennials and boomers aren't as big as people might think, but there are some attitudinal differences. And so Andrew and I are here representing the boomers, right? We're about the same age, and I may joke about him being in the industry a long time. That's only because I've been in it about the same number of years. I think Jason's probably in the middle, and you're probably more the millennial, right? So as we look across the generations, how do you have an employer brand? I mean, and you've got to be conscious of it as a strategy that resonates with workers who might be from 18 to 60, right? So Andrew, what are you telling your clients about having a brand that can span that kind of generational, its tastes and attitudes differ? What do you do?
Yeah, I think so. I think the employer brand, if it's kind of done based on the research, the insight, well articulated, as I said yesterday in that presentation, you create your themes and your core messages. So that stays as it is. But then I think you have to think, what's the audience I'm now trying to reach? So, what's the persona? What is it they like? What channels do they consume media in? What type of content will work for them? And then you start to package up that brand in the right way with the right creative message and the right content and the right channel and deliver that. So, if that's students and campus, it might be one way. It might be that you're doing some, kind of part-time recruitment of people that potentially at the other end of their career, they're just doing kind of 2 or 3 days of work. It's going to be the same messaging, but it's going to be how you deliver it and the context with which you deliver that message to that group of people. So for me, it just makes life a bit more complex, but what you mustn't do is dilute that brand. The brand doesn't change, because whether they're young, old, whatever, and they come into the organization, the culture and the values they experience should be common across all those different generations. But how you've kind of teased them into the organization, that might be slightly different.
How about you, Jason? What do you think?
No, I fully echo. We need to be fully inclusive, but our brand is our brand. And where we deliver that message is where we take it to them. So in how we go about doing this, we ask internally, where are you picking up? Where do you see this? What do you think? We try and pull that in. But then our imagery, our branding, our material and all that is fully inclusive, so that those can picture themselves in the organization with us. But I echo what you say fully. You can't ignore it. You pull them in.
All right, Sarah, what do you think?
Consistency. Consistency in the messaging. So your brand is your brand. You can't change what it is that you're trying to say, but you definitely have to tweak the experience that each one of those generations is going to go through, whether they're a potential candidate, whether it's a service that you're providing to the community and what generation you're addressing. So the approach may differ, but you definitely have to ensure that there's consistency in your messaging to all segments of society. Where your focus lies, how you want to approach that will vary, but you said that they exist within your organization. So hearing what they have to say And just being open to suggestions that are provided from within the organization can really help in reaching out to community segments and generations available. Why not listen to your own people when you have that at your very own disposal?
You know, I think you're all saying from the same. The consistency, by the way, of your messaging is very good between the three of you. You know, one of the things, and we did a study at HRO today, Larry Bassinet, who's here in the audience with us from our team, where we asked the different generations how they liked being approached and how they liked to, from a candidate experience. And it was almost identical across every generational cohort, even down to they didn't like being contacted over LinkedIn, the boomers to the millennials. And by the way, the term millennial is something you will never hear a young person use. If someone says millennial, you should translate it into I'm listening to like an old fart, because millennials never actually describe themselves that way. But even from the youngest to the oldest workers, they wanted to get email. They found you getting in touch with them over social media was intrusive, right? So the generational attitudes were very similar about a whole host of different things. Peter Capelli, who's the professor who runs the Center for Human Resources at Wharton School, and I have lunch about 4 times a year. And he came about a year ago and said to me, we've done this massive study on the generational cohorts. You know what the big difference between the youngest workers and the oldest workers were? And I was sitting there and I said, mathematical computational skills. And he looked at me and said, what? I said, they degrade with age. If you were testing people, younger people would have an unnatural advantage over older people. And he looked at me and he said, there's a reason nobody likes you, Elliot. Yes, that's the only difference, all right? He said, there's a reason nobody likes you. So the truth is that you've got to just, everyone's people. Doesn't matter,
I think
but we talk a lot about it.
It's not just so I think you've got to look at the brand across job families as well.
Families.
It's not just an age thing. I mean, I was talking in Jameson's Distillery last night with a lady from Marriott, and we were talking about a housekeeper, and the message and how the brand is communicated to somebody who probably comes along, has huge pride in the work she does, leaving the room looking immaculate, and paid relatively little money, but goes home with that sense of I belong to Marriott. Why? And how do you deliver the brand to somebody like that in a way that allows them to go and engage with perhaps friends and relatives about what working at Marriott's like, versus potential management, graduates and whatever. And I think you've got to think not just an age thing, but a job family, a role thing, and say, how do you make the message relevant, package it up and deliver it in a way that resonates with each job family and each type of role in an organization?
And genders, ethnicities, cultures, because your brand just could be your brand, right? Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what your brand should not be. Final question for everyone. It's the lightning round, all right? And if we have time permitting, I'll take a few questions from the audience for the panel. All right, so finish the following sentence. The one thing you should never do with your employment brand, is blank. Put you on the spot first, Sarah. The one thing you should never do with your employment brand is?
Promise something you can't live up to. Promise something you know you will not deliver. Loses credibility. You lose your credibility. Your brand. If damage is done to your employer brand, being able to recover from that is extremely difficult. And we've seen that happen with various companies across the world. It's detrimental. So don't promise something. Don't use your employer brand in a way where you promise to deliver and fail to do so.
Yeah, my ex-wife made that comment about me at the divorce. All right, Jason, what's the one thing you should never do with your employment brand?
Do nothing.
She said that about me too. All right, go ahead. Just do nothing?
Yeah, do nothing. You have to be actively involved in your brand. And I echo what you say. Don't lie about who you are. Be honest, be authentic. But the worst thing you can do is do nothing. Ignore it.
All right, Andrew, the one thing you should never do with your employment brand is?
Yeah, I think I'd say don't make it up. So an employer brand has to be real, it has to be authentic. You have to do the research and the insight to truly develop that story and that narrative of who you are. And I think there are organisations out there that just make it up. They kind of come up with some nice phrases. They describe it because a few people feel that it's what they're like as an organisation. It's not real, it's not authentic, and then you can push that out, and all you do is end up with dissatisfaction because you are promising things that you can't be, and you're kind of not managing it well. So you have to manage it, as we said yesterday as well. So don't make it up.
Yeah, my ex-wife also mentioned dissatisfaction too. That's embarrassing. So if you have questions from the audience, we have a few minutes. So anyone have a question they want to put? It's been a great panel. And there's probably more issues that probably have occurred to you folks. So who's going to be brave enough to go first? No questions? Aha, Matthew Rogers, thank you for rescuing me. Yeah, that embarrassing silence when Elliot has nothing to say.
Bill yet. Andrew, for you, I think mostly for you, you've been around the employer branding and value proposition kind of definition space for a hell of a long time. Sorry, that was a compliment, Andrew.
It's a 600-year-old conversation.
It was a compliment.
It is true.
And so I wondered if you could share with us the kind of best execution that you've ever worked on or been part of, or the kind of one client engagement that sticks out in your mind and you step back and think, wow, that was outstanding. You know, what's the one that sticks in your memory as being fantastic?
That's a very good question. I mean, you kind of get excited about the current one that you're doing and the work you kind of produced. I think the one that really sticks in my mind is one that we started probably 2 or 3 years ago, and actually it's still ongoing for Sainsbury's. So Sainsbury's is a very large grocery sort of company in the UK, but they own a bank. Then they bought Argos. They've gone online, and you know, kind of the story about them, everyone pictures as a supermarket with shelf stackers, but they're a very large, complex organisation. They're now the second largest digital retailer in the UK, and you've got this kind of perception around them, which was kind of just this retail business. But doing that exercise allowed us to kind of really get under the skin of the organisation. We did the research from really senior executives right the way through down to store workers. And it was probably one of the strongest, we talk about the themes and the pillars that emerge, and it was one of the strongest that I've ever come across, that the sense of family and do the right thing for the customer, just every single conversation. And then they would give you story after story about how that was real for them. And this is a couple of Christmases ago, and just to kind of share that with you, they gave every single worker in the stores a bunch of vouchers. And they said, this is some vouchers for customers. And I said, so what, how did they kind of distribute them? And they said, well, we just trusted them. So we gave our workers vouchers, and we just said, choose someone that you think deserves these vouchers from your interaction with customer, and just give them to them. And I thought, what an amazing kind of evidence of the trust, the belief in the customer value that organisation has, that they literally empowered people with no brief, no rules, no regulations, just go and show the customer that we think they're really important and you do it your way. And it was just, it was a great, kind of great piece of work. We did the themes, did the pillars, did nice creative work. But for me, it was just the research and insight gave such a strong kind of belief about what that organisation is. They're not all positive. Sometimes you get the things that they also need to do, because part of an employer brand is aspirational around where the organisation wants to be. And actually in kind of grocery retail at the moment, there is huge momentum around the Aldis and the Lidls as the competition, the online stuff, and whatever. So you also pick out those aspirational, visionary parts of the employer brand about what needs to change and what they need more of to go and be more successful in the future. But that probably does stick out as just a really enjoyable and very inspirational kind of story to get involved with.
All right, we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Go ahead. Can we get a microphone over there, Larry? Right here, in the middle. No, but right here.
Okay, hi, I'm Yasmin from Vodafone Egypt. So, to any one of you, based on your experiences, do you have like a solid or certain methodology to share for companies to build their EVP in terms of the very beginning of taking the employee voice into consideration until evolving into becoming an actual tagline that can be used for recruitment, marketing, and employer branding and so on?
So if you're coming up with a new brand, Jason, what would you do? What would you recommend?
So we ask the employees, we're going through it right now, right? So Weatherford is we're one Weatherford now, right? That's our tag, right? When we're coming through, but to get there, and as we are emerging and coming through and reinventing, we've gone back and we're asking our own employees because reality is to have that value proposition, you have to believe in why you're there. And if you can't say that, then how can you ask somebody else, right? So we are asking the business, those that are here that create the company, to tell us what they think, and then we will come up. What will end up happening, what we're doing is we will come up with the most commonality out of that, and we will put it back in, we'll vote on it, now it will come out. So that value proposition, though, will come from 78 countries around the globe. The commonality out of that will become our value proposition. So we've asked the people that are actually doing it, what is that value proposition that makes us one Weatherford?
How about you, Sarah? Gulf Bank Kuwait, what would you recommend in terms of best practices in developing the employer brand?
Well, you generally have an idea or a direction as to what it is that you want to stand for, but by no means can you just take that and run with it. You have to hear what your employees have to say. You have to hear the sentiment. Ultimately, for them to feel as a part of this organization, and their role is actually important in delivering the purpose of the organization, you have to listen to your employees. The common mistake many companies do is they seek external help in having a packaged, pretty, ready off-the-shelf EVP that they can use, make little tweaks to make it their own, and then use it. And that's definitely something that we advise against, because if you don't live it, if you don't stand for it, and you truly can't live by it and execute your work accordingly, then it's going to be short-lived. After a period of time, whether it's a new employee joining or someone that's within looking outside at what EVP you're putting out there, the authenticity becomes questionable, and you never want to be in that situation.
And Andrew, I mean, you do this for many, many different companies to help them define themselves. What do you recommend?
Yeah, I agree with Sarah and Jason. I mean, to be authentic, it has to be from the employees. So we'll typically break the research and insight down into 3, maybe four kind of complete pieces of work. So we will often start with senior executives in the business and say, what do you think it's like? Where's your vision for where the business needs to go? And kind of what type of talent is right for the future. So you kind of get that forward focus around it. You then do a lot of work with employees internally, so focus groups internally, where again you're looking not just kind of why have you joined, why do you stay, but tell me, give me stories around how you bring that to life, because that gives it a degree of authenticity. And what we'll often do is actually go and look at the external groups of people as well. So people that are the talent groups that the organization would like to hire, and you ask them what they think of that organization. Because one of the things that the brand typically has to do is connect people externally with the organization. And if you don't understand the gap, so what's the perception difference between the reality from the senior executives and the employees and what the external audience actually believes, then you don't quite know what to do. So you have to kind of get that external viewpoint as well. And then finally, just to kind of gain, in terms of building the messaging, as you said, kind of make it into a recruitment marketing campaign, what we also often do is some just desk research. So against the organizations with whom you might compete, what is it they are saying about themselves, and what messages do they kind of already have? Because what you want to do is take all of the data that you've built, put it in a kind of pot, look at what it says you are and what you want to be as an organization, and then look at what the others are saying, and then try and find messages that you can genuinely own for yourself. And then you start to build the creative and the external messaging around that thing that allows you to differentiate, which is one of the things from the research that HRO did. You know, we talked about how much does it differentiate you. You want something that makes people really feel that you're a different organisation and aspire to want to come and work with you or work for you. So we probably put those 4 bits of research together and then work on the creative, you know, that strap line, the creative messaging, and then the executions.
All right. I want to thank our panel. You know, I particularly want to thank Sarah Al-Rafai and Jason Munoz for stepping in only in the last few days and, you know, got the brief and came up with some great contributions. Andrew Wilkinson, you know, executive leader and group managing director of Europe for Asia Pacific for PeopleScale. And literally just a tremendous wealth of knowledge on branding and recruitment, et cetera. Jason, head of TA for Weatherford, and Sarah, who's the senior manager for HR development, business development at Gulf Bank of Kuwait. Thank you, panelists. Appreciate it. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you.